Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, admission survey in a wild year. An article by Scott Jaschik of Inside Higher Ed. Our questions from the listener will be 3 questions, which will be responded to by 3 people. Lisa, Sylvia, and Mark will be giving their answers to question 1. What if a student refuses to do the things necessary to complete his or her application? Question number 2. What is the right balance of parent involvement versus student ownership in this process? And question number 3. What to do if your child doesn't do a lot of activities? Our interview was with Kevin Newton, the founder of An Education Abroad, on going to college overseas. This is part 2 of 2, and there'll be no college spotlight for this week.
And friends, we just have one big announcement today, and that is please send in your questions for us concerning 3 topics in particular. Probably the most time-sensitive one is anything to do about money, financial aid, scholarships, paying for college, complications related to the forms or the net price calculators, anything like that, because we have 2 esteemed guests that are going to be addressing 8 to 10 questions. We'll probably run that over 4 weeks. So we have room for quite a few questions. We've had a decent number come in, but we still have room for more, and we will be recording that around Thanksgiving, but it'll air in late January. So there's still a couple weeks to get your questions in. The second category is anything to do with athletics. Over the next 12 months, I'll be having 2 guests coming on to address athletics in the college admissions process. I've had a good number of questions come in on athletics, but we still have room for a little more. And then, of course, you can always send your questions in for our current interview, Kevin Newton. Anything you want to know about going to college overseas. Once again, that's questions at yourcollegeboundkid.com. All right, Dave. So for our admissions tip, this is gonna help some seniors who are still applying to schools and haven't submitted their applications yet, and definitely your juniors. So when you're researching your colleges, one of the things you want to find out is, do they have any college-specific questions? And if they do, you want to look at every single word of those questions in that question, because a college is literally revealing to you who they are and what they value by those questions. Those questions are chosen so intentionally. It almost reminds me of when a board gets together and they make their mission statement out. Hours and hours are spent. So I'm just going to give you an example of how you can learn about a school just by the questions. So this is the new school and in New York City, and this is their question. I've worked with several students on this question in the last week. The new school's innovative programs and engaged community are inspired by the future. Tell us about your future self. Where are you? What are you doing? Check this out. What are you innovating? Who asks you that? What are you innovating? And how are you affecting change? And then it goes on to say, how does the new school fit into the journey towards the future? Be as specific as possible. So right away there, they don't want general. And I'll get more. I'm going to do a whole deep dive sometime over the next 6 months on how to do these why us questions. So I'm not going to comment on that. But what I'm telling you is when they say, what are you innovating? How are you affecting change? Whoa, pump the brakes. They're telling you a lot about their school. And I'm just going to tell you something about the new school. Dave's familiar with the new school because, of course, his sister, went to one of the schools in there. But let me just tell you a little something about the new school, and you'll see why they're asking these questions. The new school is a private research university founded in 1919 in New York City. And it was founded as the New School for Social Research. And the original mission was dedicated to academic freedom, intellectual inquiry for progressive thinkers. Since then, it's grown into 5 different divisions, and these include the Parsons School of Design, the Eugene Lang College of Liberal Arts, the College of the Performing Arts, and then even within performing arts, they have a School of Music, a School of Drama, a School of Jazz and Contemporary Music, a School of Social Science Research and Public Engagement. So they're all about creativity and social change, and they're telling you that right in the question. So if you're a junior and you're trying to figure out how does this school compare to this school, first of all, find out if they have questions and look at them word by word and see what they reveal to you about the school. I know Dave knows a lot about Parsons. You've been there many times with your sister.
Right. That's right.
Graduating from there. All right, Dave, for our admissions vernacular, the word of the day, custom questions. What are custom questions?
Well, custom questions have to be questions that are actually uniquely tailored to a particular school or applicant's needs, desires, wants, or interests.
You started out like you knew what you were talking about, and then after that, you're bluffing, man. So custom questions are exactly what you first said, questions that are custom to the school, and they're exactly what I just finished talking about the new school. Look for the school's questions. So I call them college-specific questions. Some people call them supplements, but some people also call them the custom questions. There you go, our word of the day. I give you partial credit, mostly credit, 3/4.
Well, Eddie Murphy said in one of his movies, it sounded good.
You know I don't know the movie, but it's okay. I can laugh anyway. Okay, and now we have our big number. And boy, our big number it's a big number indeed. And it's such a big number that I couldn't decide between 2 of these big numbers. So you're getting 2 today. The first is 100 million. What is 100 million? It is the amount of money that the ACT lost from 2019 to 2020 by going test optional.
Ooh.
Now, you ready for the next big number, Dave?
Let's do it.
286 million. The amount of money the College Board lost from 2019 to 2020. Over $250 million. So welcome back. These tests is hurting some people pretty hard in the pocket. Oh, you can't charge all that money for all the tests they administer.
Man, that's some moolah.
Yes. All right, Dave, exciting article. Take it away, my friend.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right. Well, this is a survey article. It's by Scott Jaschik. It says admission survey in what he terms a wild year, in which he surveys 208 admission officers. So I'm going to briefly go through the highlights of these survey, and then I'm going to kick it back to you, Mark, to see what parts of these points you would like to emphasize. So what Scott's found was, number 1, admission officers were worried about...
One second, Dave. It's not Scott. So they a lot of times they partner with Gallup or different organizations. So yeah, he works for Inside Higher Ed. He's the chief editor. So he's reporting the data, but they outsource to professional companies like Gallup to do the surveys.
Oh, okay. Well, it's easier to say.
Give him my man Scott. I love Scott, but you give him a little bit too much props over here.
Okay, well, I have to go. Well, my man Gallup, according to Gallup. Okay. Number 1, admission officers were worried about filling their classes by May 1st, and by June, in fact, most admission officers were still searching for students. They were concerned, and they did feel, number 2, that campus closures did hurt their efforts to place students, but they did say that the interest in videos and online recruiting they expect to remain quite high. But despite these difficulties, over half of admission officers expect to enroll more students this fall than last, which is good. And 1/3 said the pandemic did not change the nature of or character of whom they admitted. 37% said it did, but in a minor way. So for the majority of these schools, it didn't seem like they had to downgrade their student body to fill their classes. 95% of these campuses were test blind or test optional this year, which explains the big losses we just talked about.
Explain the 286 million.
I know. Now, boo-hoo they did not like that. What's bad news for the companies is that 3/4 of admission officers favor continuing test optionals Definitely. So this is a trend that is here to stay. So, Mark, what say you? Where would you like to take this article?
Yeah, so there's a few things that I wanted to highlight in here. First thing I want to talk about is meeting your class by May 1st. So May 1st has gotten a name over the years. We call it National Candidate Reply Day. That's the day when if you apply rolling admission, regular admission, or early action, you have until May 1st before you have to make a decision. And so that's kind of been the big deadline. But what's happened over time is colleges have really, really, really struggled to fill their class. It's almost become the myth of May 1st. And we've talked about that before, but here's hardcore data to back it up. So let's just look at it. How many colleges met their class, meaning they'd met their enrollment number by May 1st? 32%. So less than 1 in 3
Wow.
had their class full by May 1st. Now it gets even worse. So then they asked, well, did you have your class met by June 1st? And only 16% more had their class met by June 1st. So you had 32 and 16, you get 48. So less than half of colleges were full a month after what had been the traditional deadline. Now let's back it up to July 1st. Did you meet your class by July 1st? Only 8% more. So literally 56% of people had their class met by July 1st. Simple math, 44% of people, Dave, are still trying to fill their class in July and August. And that has a lot of and of course some people never fill. And they open with under enrollment, but that has major ramifications for a lot of things that you'll see that will happen over the summer. One of the things that is very common is for students to feel almost like they're getting badgered by schools that they, were admitted at that they haven't chosen to enroll at. Oftentimes throwing financial offers at you or various incentives for students to come. And now you get why. Because fully 44% of people are going into the month of July and August or not filling their class at all. And so, we can't stress enough because it's so weird, all this talk about college admissions. It focuses so much on about 3% of institutions, and it gives you the impression that it's crazy frenzy out there. And it is for the 1 to 2 to 3%. But the overwhelming majority of schools are hoping they can have enough bodies and what we call butts in the seats. Enough butts in the seats to pay the bills. So that was my first thing I wanted to comment on. Dave, anything that you want to comment on that?
Well, I just want to add in the added issue of summer melt. We talk about that. So, I mean, they're
Sure.
not filling
Yeah.
their seats in June and July. And then some of the people or a significant portion of the people that they've admitted in June and May aren't showing up in August. So, yeah, it's a double-edged sword for these colleges.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up. It's a really, really important point. I mean, some schools experience melts between 30 and 40%. It's highly correlated with social class. You definitely find the more non-traditional, the more first gen, the more under-resourced students, they just don't have a parent or anybody that's guided them through the process before like that. And then a lot of times financial storms just hit them, like a tornado and throw you off your kilter. And then the other thing is just following all the logistics of everything you have to do if there's nobody really to guide. It's a combination of first gen and the lack of counseling, the lack of resources for counseling. That I mean, and also some colleges do make their process probably more complicated than they need to. I mean, schools like Georgia State have had tremendous success starting text message campaigns, where kids get text about every little thing that they need to do, and things like that have really helped reduce melt. But this isn't about melt. All right, let's move on. So the other thing that I thought was really fascinating to me in this article, Dave, was the number of schools that basically lowered their standards in order to fill their class. So, one of the things it says, despite all the changes, most colleges, 74% said they didn't admit students this year whom the college wouldn't have admitted in prior years. And you can look at that two ways. Well, that's pretty good. 74% of the people you admitted, you would have admitted anyway. I actually see it the other way. So 26% of kids who you admitted would not have gone in. And so when you want to know why so many schools did meet their budget, it's because they lowered their standards, and that's the way they accommodate it for all the fallout from COVID. If before you were a school that was taking, let's say your average kid was like a 3.2, and well, let's say in a test score environment, they had like a, 21 ACT and a 1050 SAT. Well, now you're taking 3.0, and a 19 ACT and a 950 SAT. That's just, I hate to put people in numbers because I'm just giving you overall statistical averages. Obviously, there's extremes on any curve. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think it does dovetail to the discussion we had last week where we talked about graduation rates. And I will be interested to see if there's any data looking at this cohort of kids that maybe might not have gotten in, how successful their retention rates are going to be. I'm hoping that the colleges can meet the lowered standards by not having to increase their non-graduation rates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so one of the good things actually, Dave, is when you're in an environment where you see slippage
Yeah,
in your apps and melt and retention, it it forces you to up your game,
yeah,
right? And so there are a lot of really positive things that are happening right now when it comes to retention. And some of it is because people are being forced to do it. It's sort of like if you barely, it's like, it's sort of like if you're running a hotel and you're used to full occupancy, and then you start noticing your occupancy going, I Dale could use you and your real estate tenants, but I'll just use the hotel.
yeah.
And then you start noticing your numbers go down. Guess what? You better treat every customer like gold because you want them coming back because you can't afford to burn your market share out.
Well, and I gotta interject. It always stunned me that to me this was such an easy financial fix. It's your retention. If you're losing 30% of your students in the course of 3 4 years, that's 30% of your revenue base. So on the one hand, you say we have to admit more students, but if you can retain a greater percentage of your students, you can find so many ways to address your financial difficulties that way as well.
Yeah, it's true. It's just that it's really, really, really complicated. So just, for those of you who know, I work at KIP, and KIP mostly we have a range of no income to get into KIP, but it's mostly under-resourced students. There's a higher percentage of that than the population. And first gen, it's an access organization. And we have 3 full-time people that travel around the country that visit the students in their school. We have all kinds of programs and resources and money, but the complications of problems from that demographic, I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, the things that people deal with in their family situations that really, 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 I think the average middle class family just has no idea. Whether it's like, you know, hey, I'm just trying to survive because I don't want to see my dad beat my mom again, or dealing with alcoholism, or just all kinds of things. I don't even get started around other levels of dysfunctionality. And so most of the chaos is money related. It's the single mom who loses her job, so her son feels he needs to drop out of college because there's a 2-year-old girl at home. And how is she going to eat? It's the family that gets an eviction notice, and they're going to have to sleep in a car unless the kid stops school and gets a Walmart or Amazon job that pays 17 an hour. So he leaves college, but at least he don't have to sleep in a car at night. Even when you have the kind of resources that we have, I don't want to rehash last week's conversation, but
Yeah.
I mean, graduation rate for families that make under $25,000 that are first gen is 7%, 7.3% nationally. And so KIP, we've won all kinds of awards by having a graduation between 30 and 33. And Gates and all these different people have thrown money at us because our graduation rate is 4 times the national average. So it's you got to throw resources at it, but it's not that easy because of the problems that families are coming with from their backgrounds.
And that's real. I mean, you sent me a text email about one reader who's like, I believe, a professor, and she said one of her students wrote and said, can you delay the test because my girlfriend just had a baby last night and I was in the hospital all night, and
Right.
if I have to take this test today, I'm going to fail. So I mean, it's the realities of life getting in the way.
Well, let me tell you. Let me make it even more personal. So I got a call late last night from a family I'm working with. That's all I'm going to say. My KIP side, and the mom just finished telling me, like because I was saying, I started out by saying, what happened? Like our communication was so great, and it sort of has just kind of dropped off. And then she's like, Mark, life hit me, and so she proceeded to tell me multiple things. One, her ex-husband, who's not in the scene anymore, and that creates all kinds of drama. He went off and got remarried and didn't tell the kids, and so they're absolutely devastated psychologically. Now they need mental health help. Her best friend, who she was maid of honor in the wedding, just died of COVID. She needs knee surgery. She has no idea how she's going to pay for the knee surgery. And I could go on and on. I'm not going to say the litany of her problems, but it's just life. It's just hard, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
It's just hard. So, anyway, any other thing you saw in this survey, Joy? Joy, I was calling you Joy. Talk to Joy a lot, as you can tell.
Well, I think the really thing that stuck out to me was the test optional, test blind issues.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, the bottom that's
Comment on it.
huge. Yeah. Well, let's tee it up. $250 million lost in revenue. And why? 95% of these campuses were test blind or test optional. What was the result? Those campuses admitted actually more black, first gen, Latinx, more diversity, and it was so successful that three-quarters of admission officers think that it's here to stay. And to add into it, what we talked about, Mark, didn't the California system decide that not only are they not going to go back to the ACT or SAT, but they're going to scrap plans for having that California specific test to replace them. So I think that the significance of the test optional movement has been huge, and the fact that it's here to stay really was the big take home for me of this article.
Yeah, and the thing is, when you look at Cal State and UCs, they're huge
Yeah.
systems, right? And they have traditionally been trendsetters. And so, in fact, there's interesting history, Dave. When you go back and look, you may remember in 2005, the SAT when you and I took it was out of 1600, and for a while it went to 2400.
Right.
From '05 to 16, it went to 2400.
Yeah.
Well, why? It's because the University of California threatened back then to pull out of the whole system unless they made changes. And so the College Board, they've always feared the behemoth of a California with its 40 million people.
Yeah.
And that is going to reverberate throughout all of college admissions. The UCs and the CSUs going test blind, which is still the term that I use. And I know that some people are saying it's not politically correct because blind is disabilities and test free and score free. Some people prefer, but I'm just not that politically correct, I guess. I still like the term test blind. You people can use score free, test free. Use whatever term you want. But
Test
it just
optically
is.
challenged.
There you go. Optically challenged. I mean, look, I do want to be sensitive. I'm someone who believes in being sensitive, but I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't seem to me like the word test blind should be offensive. But anyway, when I talk to the college counselors that I know out there and the students that I work with, I have to take a look. But California, I think, is my biggest state right now. California, New Jersey, for where I work, my largest group of students. Some of them have a hard time finding places that are offering the test because it makes sense, right? Like if your schools go test blind, that kind of shrinks up the industry of offering it. Why offer it if so many of your local main public schools aren't even going to receive it?
That's right.
So now it makes it harder to get, which has ramifications for other schools across the country that want to move to the test. Are you going to ignore a huge state like California where kids are having a hard time even taking it? I'm not saying it's impossible to take, but it's much, much harder than it used to be. It's offered far less when your main schools don't offer it. So that's going to have a lot of ramifications. One thing that's going to be fascinating is to look at 2023. 2023 is going to be the test year when we're going to see the people that have gone test optional in 2021 and 2022 because of the pandemic, what they do in 2023. And, one of our listeners sent in a question and they said, Mark, it's been a while since you did some forecasting on how you think things are going to change with COVID and all the things going on in college admissions. Can you give your projections for what you see? And I'm actually going to take that on in the next few weeks in our questions. I've been preparing some material. So tease. I'm going to come back and say something around testing that it's probably a little bit of an out there prediction that I have, but we'll see if I'm right. I have a very unique prediction of something I think is going to happen, and I'll throw it out there in that projection article, and then we'll see over the next 5 years if I'm right. But
I'm going to do a little guess here. I think it might break down to the whole thing of test blind versus test optional, which schools adopt either program. And I just want to do a little review. If you guys don't know the difference, remember Edan Shahar way back when test optional is not necessarily test blind, and I think that's going to be a huge differentiation right there.
yeah, no, it's much more nuanced than that. And so I know you're in the guessing game, trying to get redemption for vernacular, but no. Now there's another thing in this questionnaire that was a little bit of interest, which is I don't want to harp on it too much because I think we've said it enough, which is like the data is here, virtual is here to stay, right? Like, I mean, they asked that question. Will you continue to do virtual programming? And virtual programming is one of the main reasons why so many schools did end up making their number. It was a combination of virtual programming, and I'm talking about using the computer to do tours and information sessions and all kinds of creative things. It was lowering your admission standard. And some of it was a lot of tuition freezes happened. A lot of schools said, no way in the world in the pandemic can we increase prices. And some schools even came up with some unique and creative additional funding, during the time of COVID. So those are some of the reasons why the numbers, because when you do look at the numbers, like in some ways, they weren't as bad as they could have been. So they asked the question, overall, what are your expectations for enrollment for fall of 2021? So private colleges, 56% said they expect more undergraduates than the year before. 18% said the same, and 27% said fewer. And then for public colleges, 1/3 said they expect more. 24% said the same. And then this is a pretty big number. 43% of public colleges said they expect less students. So yeah, Dave and I, this is a survey they do every year. We've talked about it before. They do this big admission survey, and we'll probably talk about it next year when it comes up again.
Sounds like a good wrap.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, super excited. The first time I've ever been on a podcast live with both Sylvia and Lisa. How are you today, Sylvia and Lisa?
Doing really well.
Doing great, Mark.
Good. So we are going to attempt to tackle 3 really hard questions, actually, that you sent in, and you didn't send them in our traditional way through going to questions@collegeaboutkid.com. You sent them in on our questionnaire, and we love them. And so we're going to take all 3 of them today, and we're all going to kind of chime in with our thoughts. I'll kick it off, and then we'll get the wisdom of the ladies. But before we do, as promised, this is our last week we're doing our countdown on endowment. So big news from number 10 all the way to number 1. So here we go. In 10th spot, Grinnell College, Grinnell, Iowa. And so you can study the history of that. But Warren Buffett and Geico Insurance made that school multi-millions. Number 9, Swarthmore College, Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. And now we are still at 1.2 million per student. We go up to 1.3 million, a place not super far from you, Sylvia, Pomona College, Claremont, California, place that my daughter considered. Then we go to number 7, Pasadena, California, California Institute of Technology. Comes in at number 7, wealthiest schools in the country. Okay, now number 6, we're up to over 1.5 million per student. Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, better known as MIT. And in number 5, we stay right in Cambridge at 1.6 million now per student. Harvard University, also in Cambridge, 1.6 million per kid. The 4th wealthiest school in the country in endowment per student, we go back to California. Stanford University, Palo Alto, California, 1.62 million per kid. And at number 3, now we're into the 1.8 million range, Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut. And this one is going to surprise everybody. The number 2 university with a whopping 2.9 million per student, Soka University in, I'm not even sure if I'm saying this right, but you can help me with this, Sylvia. Is it a Lisa Viejo? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Aliso Viejo.
Elisa Viejo, Orange County. And this is an interesting university. They have just a little more than 400 students. It started really just, well, the current location's only been there 20 years, or closer to 40 years old altogether, but it started really as a Buddhist school. And because of the Soka Gakki movement all around the world, which is 10 million strong, they have just gotten so many gifts from primarily from Buddhists and Buddhist affiliated families. And being small, they're super wealthy. And then the wealthiest school in the country with over $3 million per student, and over 40% of every one of their bills is paid for by their endowment, Princeton University, Princeton, New Jersey. So there you go. All right. Take it away, Lisa. You want to kick it off with our first question, and then we'll let Sylvia do our second?
Absolutely. So here's the first question. It is, you talk about all the great resources like college reviews and course catalogs to help students learn about schools. What if your student refuses to engage with any of these resources or won't do the things they need to do to complete their applications?
Yeah. And I tell you, all three of these questions are great questions, and they're hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to make several comments on this one, and then ladies, we'll let you chime in and share your thoughts. So first of all, there's a reason why the saying "familiarity breeds contempt" became part of our parlance and in our English, dictum. Really, it has to do with the fact that there's truth to that, right? Like, you're around somebody all the time, and you tend to tune them out. And the way it basically plays out is parents care so much about their kid, and they don't want to see them blow an opportunity. So we ride them really hard sometimes, whether it's doing test prep, homework, scholarship essays, or exams, or whatever it is, because we don't want to see them blow the opportunity. And then the kid is like, "I'm not 12 anymore. Stop treating me like I'm a 12-year-old." And so it just kind of creates that natural tension. And I'd love $1 for every parent that's told me, "I need another voice in my kid's ear because there's tension between me and my kid, and I don't want the last year of them in the home to be mired with this tension." And every kid is a little different. And so that's what makes this so challenging, is to see, the differences that you see from one kid to the next. My own daughter, my youngest, was probably one of the 3 hardest kids I ever worked with. And I've worked with over 1,500 kids. She doesn't like it when I say that, but I'm like, "Sorry, Joy, you were tough, you know? And so I really feel for this. It is very difficult. It's difficult getting that balance. And a lot of times, they do need another voice in their ear. And I know that each of the last 3 years, I've worked with at least 4 families where the parent was a college counselor. And they're like, "I don't want to be doing this." I'm not saying that you can't do it, because some people can. It's just about knowing your own situation. Often it's a sign that your kid hasn't found an area of learning that really enthuses them. Um, I'm big on the fact that once you find that area for someone, then they can come alive. I know, like Joy, she really wasn't into reading until she discovered a passion for sociology, mental health, and social justice. So it could be an indication that you need to probe, whether that's through taking different tests or exposure to different things to find out some of their other areas of interest. So it could also be a sign that you're starting the process too soon. So one of the hardest questions for me always is, when is the right time to start the college process? And the answer is, it varies so much from one person to the next. But one thing that I've learned is, when the student wants to start is an extremely important clue as to when a good time for you to get involved is. And I'll give you 2 extremes. I'm working with a couple twins now in Texas, and one of them is really not interested in doing much, and he's a senior. And then I think back to Anika's daughter, Janaea. We call her Naya. I worked with Anika before on a 10-hour college admissions video series that came out in 2014. Naya was 6th grade at the time, and she would not stop watching that thing. Anika didn't even recommend it. She's just fascinated by it. And you could sort of argue she started the process in the 6th grade, and nobody forced her. She was just intellectually curious. So one of the things is, it could be an indication that you're starting too soon for your child. And then the last thing I want to share is, and this is really hard, but I'm going to put it out there. it could be a sign that college just isn't for your kid right now. And that can be kind of hard depending on how you're raised. I know I was raised from a background, there's just no question you go to college. It's just what you do. But I think of my own sister who was raised the same way. And her oldest daughter is like valedictorian, high achiever, all that. Her other son, he had no interest in school. And he decided not to go to college. He's a millwright. He's doing really, really well. And he's happy. And I respect that they let him have that freedom. And that's kind of hard for a lot of us as middle school parents. You know, I know for a while after Karis was done Davidson, she wanted to be a baker. And I was like, we spent all this money preparing you for private school and you want to be a baker? Nothing wrong with being a baker. But she was working at a Baskin Robbins, learning how to make cakes because she went through a phase where that's what she wanted to do. And part of me was like, if you're happy doing that, then God bless you. But there was another part of me that was like, we didn't have to go to college for all of this. And so it was hard for me to accept that. And so it's not necessarily the easiest thing. And then she got out of that phase. It was an 18-month phase. She does it on the side now. But sometimes it is a sign that maybe an alternative path is what somebody needs to pursue. So that's all I have. And I want to see what the ladies think.
Well, I think it's such a great question. And I think the answer is probably different for every kid. But I think, from the psychology perspective, we call this resistance, right? You're supposed to be doing something, you're not doing it. And so the question is, why? What is behind the resistance? And there could be any number of answers. One could be kid is nervous. Going away from home, if you're thinking about going away to college, it's a really big transition. They're scared. They're afraid they might make the wrong choice. They're afraid they might fail. So you'd have one strategy dealing with that. There might be another kid who is like, I don't want to go to college. I want to go to beauty school. And my parents keep pressuring me to go to college. And that's another path. I think also kids who have learning differences, that's another thing, it just might be such an overwhelming task unless we kind of structure it and break it down for these kids, that they would just refuse. I know, with my kids, if I throw something at them that's too hard, that's when I get all of the resistance and just the stuff where you're just like, what the heck is happening here? Why are you doing this? And it's like pushing them too far. So I think you just really have to look at why and kind of proceed from that angle.
I like that. I love how you always are incorporating your psychology in answers too.
And if I can piggyback on what a word specifically that I heard you mention, Lisa, overwhelming. The parent mentioned in the question that there are a lot of helpful resources that their student is hesitant to engage with. And that made me think that's right. Things have changed a lot from when I was applying to college 25 years ago, 30 years ago. I literally had just the catalogs that came to my mailbox. That's it. Or the catalogs that were outside of my counselor's office. There were no webinars. There were no Zooms. We couldn't afford to visit campuses. We didn't have representatives sending me email. There was no email. Another suggestion would be don't have the student engage with everything. Don't have them engage with webinars and Zooms and talking with regional reps and reading course catalogs and buying the FISC guide and the Princeton review. Just have them engage with one and have them choose which medium they gravitate towards.
One of the challenges is to sort of accept the individuality of your child, as hard as that is, because they really may be charting an alternative path. And there are a lot of people that are extremely happy doing alternative paths. I mean, when I shared the story with Karis in the bakery, that's not on her. That's on me. That was my failure to accept that's where she was. And if she wanted to do that the rest of her life, then I needed to embrace that, but I sort of had this vision in my mind, like a sort of scripted mindset. And it was hard to kind of break out of that. And so I really think it's a place where we can get to know our kids more. And I like your point, Lisa, try to find out what's behind the resistance and learn from them and sort of meet them where they're at and love them where they're at.
Yeah, and just to comment on something that Sylvia said, I work with, for Scholar Match with first generation students, and I find usually they are very overwhelmed at the beginning of the process. So I will gift them, I will send them the actual FISC guide book, and they think, Lisa, you're crazy. Why are you sending me an actual book in the mail? But then they get it and they're like, oh, this is so good. It's like got these summaries and I can kind of get the feel of things. And that sort of gets them to dip their toe in the water. And then they realize there's not that many sharks in it. And they start exploring the colleges that appeal to them on the basis of that. So I think just picking one thing and even going low tech, like a book, it's a little less threatening.
Yeah, and one of the axioms I try to live by is if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always got. And that's just a simple way of saying, like, if it's not working, it's time to try something new. And sometimes it's just about trying different things. But great, great, great question. Now, I will say this. Our questionnaire doesn't ask for names, and so that's why you never heard me say, you know, this comes from Betty in Boston, because we don't know who sent this in. But we thank you for it. We just can't acknowledge you by name, but thank you for this great question. Let's transition to the next one.
Question number 2. What is the right balance of parent involvement versus student ownership in this process?
Another really tough one. And my thoughts on this is that, first of all, there's not a one size fits all. There's not a one size fits all for this. Every child is different. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to balance two different things. So the goal is to create a self-directed, self-advocating, independent student who can function without us in college. And sometimes that's actually tough. I never forget this mom I worked with in New Jersey. This is a long, long time ago. This is like 0405. But I remember her saying to me, my child doesn't need me anymore. And it was sort of like, this is a blow to my ego, you know. But that's actually the goal, right? To produce someone who can function without us. And a book that I know we recommended before is one of our recommended resources. And I know, Lisa, you referenced this book about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'd strongly recommend whoever asks this question to get this book and read it. But the book is called How to Raise an Adult by Julie Lythcott-Haims. And the subtitle is Break Free of the Over-Parenting Trap. And then I love the last phrase, and prepare your child for success. So part of the goal is to have this self-directed, self-advocating, independent student. And, I thought of this illustration. If you're trying to help your kid drive, and every time you even remotely get nervous, you grab the steering wheel, then all of a sudden they have to drive cross country and they're going into multi-lane highway and they're on their own without you. Well, they're going to crash the car. And so that's part of it. Is trying to strike that balance, between the self-directed kid you're trying to create. But the other part that you're trying to balance is recognizing where your kid is at and appropriately intervening. So I remember a conversation I was having with a manager at KIP, or Director of College Counseling, day job, charter school, with one of our senior people. And he was speaking, and he said, you know what makes a good manager? They know when to micromanage somebody because that person absolutely needs it. And without their intervention, they're going to flounder and flop. And they know when to completely let somebody do their own thing because that person does not recoils in micromanagement and they can function productively without your intervention. Like the best managers know how to do that. And that's kind of applies to parenting as well. And so I know, like even in my own household, when I look at Karis and Joy, Karis was more likely to be that person that without some intervention from us, she wouldn't have the options that she ended up. She was prone to not do things at the last minute and sometimes not turn things in. Joy, on the other hand, from the time she was in second grade, she did everything on her own, never had to be told to do her homework, and she would bristle if anybody tried to tell her what to do because she's like, I can handle this. Like I'm in I've got this. And so even within your own household, you sort of have to have a customizable strategy from one kid to the next because two kids can be completely different. And so I would say, listen to your kid, know your kid, try different things to see what works. It's not a one size fits all. And that's all I got. Lisa and Sylvia, what do you want to say on this one?
Well, I just want to say, like, if you have a kid that has like ADD or some executive functioning issues, you're going to have to get more involved. And, this is what I have to say, sort of like in defense of the helicopter parent, because sometimes you have to do that in order, to get your kid to a state. You have to scaffold them with their application process or school so that they can actually succeed. And I think, there's a lot of pushback on that a lot of times where people are critical of it, but sometimes it's necessary. Now, sometimes it's not. I have 3 kids. My oldest daughter, she's brilliant, but I don't know if she knows when her next paper is due. She'll be like, oh, that's today. My middle daughter, is hyper organized. I never have to tell her to do anything. I have no idea what her grades are. I know they're all going to be good. She does all her own homework. She does ask for no help. She runs her own show. My son, he's only 10, but I have a feeling it's going to be a mix between the two because he was supposed to go horseback riding the other day, and I told him, Thomas, put on pants, a sweater, and socks. Okay, Mom. And he comes down wearing shorts and a t-shirt. And it's like, what did we just talk about? So I have a feeling with him, it's going to be a different challenge. And so, we just have to do what we have to do as parents. I think as much as we can back off and have nothing bad happen, that's kind of the balance that you want to strike.
Mark, I really appreciate how you gave the driving example. And as you were saying it, as you began that example, I was thinking about how I taught my kids, both of my boys, how to ride a bike. And when you take off the training wheels, you were right behind them, about to catch them as they were about to fall. But I didn't push my kids off the bike, and I didn't get on it myself and start pedaling.
Right.
If I would have done that, I would have robbed them of their achievement. I would have robbed them of the joy of, wow, look at this. I did it myself. Look at me go, Mom. And I think that is a very similar process here. With the whole Varsity Blues scandal a couple of years ago, the parents that scheduled those tests and photoshopped those pictures, et cetera, they basically were saying, I don't trust you. I don't trust that you are capable of getting into a university on your own. And when the kids, quote unquote, achieved that robbed them of that ability to celebrate their skills, their strengths, their intelligence, their pursuits. And as we're, the question asks, what is the right balance in this process? And right now, I have a senior, who's finished up his applications, and so I'm done with that process with him. But if I may, flash back a few years, 5-6 years ago when he was in middle school and my youngest was in elementary, even then letting them balance the process, or rather take ownership of the process, is really critical. For example, both of my boys played soccer. They both played on club sports. And then come high school, my oldest decided, I don't want to play soccer anymore. I want to do only marching band. That's his thing. And we said, great, that sounds good. You own this process. I do sometimes work with families. Sadly, that's, and students come to me and say, well, my mom wants me to quit theater because she wants me to keep on playing field hockey. And that is, you ask, well, how do you feel about that? Well, I really love theater, or my mom wants me to join Model UN and not do the gardening club anymore. But I really love gardening. I feel so at home when I'm out there in the sun and making collections. So even if I may flash back to, you can start to allow your students to own the process and really reveal themselves to you, and not even explain, but model to you what they value, because that's going to, in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, when they're seniors, that's going to come out in their applications. It's going to be very clear that they value marching band or field hockey or theater or the gardening club, if you were able to, if you allowed them to pursue those passions.
Yeah, no, all these points are great. I've been thinking about something that Lisa said. Everything you ever hear about helicopter parenting is always negative. But actually there are some times that it does make sense to intervene. And I was talking with one of my families who now has a junior in college. And this is one of these kids who's extremely bright. He was top 1% of his class, but he was just really bright, and he didn't have to work that hard, even for like the APs and stuff. Now he's like in college, and he's struggling a little bit compared to his standards because he's not used to having to work this hard. And I did a follow-up meeting with the mom, and she sort of thought he'd gotten a little bit involved with some of the cool kids and wrong girlfriend. And you could easily say, gee, what are you doing? The kid's like 19 years. This is more freshman year. Like, let him go. But she said, I'll never forget, she said, you know what? This is where being a little helicopter actually helped me. She actually got involved a little bit, and make a long story short, the kid like realized, yeah, I'm making some bad decisions. I need to make some different decisions. And now he's like doing extremely well. And I know it doesn't always work that way, but I have been thinking a lot lately, and I know it. Lisa, you brought up with ADD. It absolutely is a time when a parent needs to be more involved because it's not necessarily a volitional issue. But I do think there are times when there's an appropriate amount of involvement, and I sometimes think that gets a bad rap. And listen, I know the most of the extremes are to the other end, but I don't think anybody ever sort of brings that point up. There's not ever sort of a defense for sometimes a parent does need to get involved. And I just think that's appropriate. And if you're looking for us to say 72% this and 28% that, 13% this and 80, it's just not going to work, right? I mean, this is almost, in some ways, it's almost an impossible question. What's the right balance of parental involvement? I just have to say that it's different for every kid. And I also have to sort of say what I said last time, which is try different things to see what works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's a balance. You're always going to be a little bit to one side or the other. You're never kind of going to be perfectly balanced. But, the other thing that I wanted just to say is if your child is suffering from depression or anxiety, that's another point where I think, parental involvement is more necessary. I know someone who is a college student and, is struggling with a tremendous amount of depression and anxiety. And their parents are, visiting them on the weekends, trying to get them to do their homework, trying to get them engaged. And, I don't think their parents, short of pulling this person out of school, which I don't think would be great either. I mean, they're doing what they have to do right now. Now, the student goes to their therapist and says, my parents are over controlling and they're always here, right? So, I mean, you would hear that side of it. But then on the other hand, the student is not doing anything that would allow the parents not to be there. So, it's just so hard. It's just parenting is so hard, and it's so hard to get the right balance. But you just kind of have to look at your own kid and see, like I said, what is the minimum amount of involvement that I can have in this situation that will be sufficient?
There's one other thing I wanted to say, and I've been wanting to talk about this a lot, like for a couple years on the podcast. So I'll just touch on it now, and maybe at some point we could go a lot deeper into it. One thing that is extremely difficult is if a parent is a type A hard charger, and if they have more of a laid back, laissez-faire kind of kid.
I'm raising my hand, folks.
So am I.
Well, so am I, and so is Dave. All four of us. But it'll drive you crazy if you're really a driven type, and if you have someone that's not as driven. And that's really difficult because you're sort of wired how you're wired, so you can only sort of think how you think. But we still have to try to catch ourselves and put some safeguards on ourselves, because you're kind of taking a circle and trying to, what was it saying? Square in a circle and a square.
Square peg into a circle.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say. I knew the longer I talked, the more I was digging myself in a hole. Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah. And that's where, as parents, I mean, I feel like I have learned so much about myself from parenting. Not always the nice things, not always the great things, but maybe things that I need to work on or correct. And you learn that by, seeing your own biases with your kids.
Yeah, no, it's true. But it's important to be aware of what they are, and at least maybe have some accountability, whether it's another spouse in the home or a sister or a friend, because that's not fair to the kid for us to try to squeeze them into our mold. All right, this is getting too convicting. Can we go to the last question?
Yes, we can. Oh, that's mine. Question okay. Number 3. What to do if a kid doesn't do a lot of activities?
So my first thoughts on this were, we could go down a whole non-college approach or a college approach to this. So the non-college approach would be the general advice of finding out what they're interested in, because I really do believe that when you find out what a kid loves, that's the key to unlocking the path for them. And that's just advice just apart from college. And so some of the things similar to what we said in the first question, right? Whether you're using a lot of different tests to identify their interests, or you're just exposing them to a lot of different things, more about life and finding what could be a pursuit for them. But I'll get out of the general lane and stick in the college lane, because I'm sure that's the lane for which it was intended. And so in the college lane, there's a couple thoughts I have. One is, and we've talked about this before, some schools do what I refer to as admission by the numbers. Other people call it formulaic admissions or guaranteed admissions. It's basically where you look at your test scores or GPA. Now, a lot of times it's just GPA only, with so many schools going test optional, sometimes curriculum and rigor. And the decision is just strictly made off of quantifiable data. I'm sure being in California there, Sylvia, you see that with the CSUs, right?
Absolutely, just grades.
Yeah. CSU's just grades. Was grades and scores, now just grades. So one college answer is there are a lot of schools like that. So pick schools that aren't going to factor activities in at all. The average person is surprised at how many people are not looking at recommendations, not looking at activities, not looking at essays at all. Just grades or grades and scores. And so there are lots of schools like that. So one college answer is build your list with lots of schools that are not even going to factor activities at all. And there's a lot of them to pick from. And so that's one. Another thing is when you look at the activities on the Common Application, let's just say, and I'm using the Common Application just because it is the most popular application out there. 40% of all colleges are on there. And I will frequently have conversations with students. I had one last night where they were saying, can you take a look at my activities list? I don't think I have that many on there. And I find that students don't have a broad mind about activities. They think activities is only structured activities. It's only school-based activities. It's only formal activities. And when we really start looking at, okay, let's look at how you spend your time, then we can find a lot of things. And so like the student was, so like when I volunteered for the Special Olympics, that counts? Yeah, that counts. But even other things, taking care of a handicapped kid or doing chores while your mom has to work or she goes to grad school. I mean, those things are activities, and we could go on and on and on. And increasingly, one of the biggest changes I've seen in college admissions, now it's not true for all schools, but much more than it used to be, is this broader definition of activities. And it's been pushed a lot by QuestBridge and Jack and Cook, and some of the access organizations have really made colleges aware of the fact that it's not fair to take a kid who has to come home and do a lot of chores and even help run the family, and the family may not have the resources to pay for all these structured things, and punish them in the admission process because they don't have all of these extracurriculars that oftentimes are expensive on their resume. There's more of an awareness than ever of that. So one thing is to brainstorm and really look at all the ways the students spending their time. You might find there are more things that actually a college would count as activities. I find that just routinely when I brainstorm with people, we find things that they didn't even think a college would be interested in. And then the last thing I want to say is, yeah, at the most selective schools, everything counts because the academic stuff doesn't differentiate. The most selective schools, ones that do holistic admissions, 70% of the kids have the grades and the rigor, and if they're not test optional, the testing is strong. So literally everything counts. But once you go down the selectivity tier a little bit, even schools that do holistic admissions, so many schools, if you have good academic record and your personal qualities make it look like you'll be a nice addition to the community, you'll be fine. And activities count, but sometimes they don't count as much as people think. I have to be so careful saying that because for certain schools, they count a lot. But even schools that do holistic admissions, if you're not looking at the most selective, if your activities aren't that robust and you look like you're a really good kid and you can do the program academically, you're fine. A lot of schools would love to have that kid. So Sylvia or Lisa, anything you want to chime in and say?
Yeah, I work with several students, but rather I should say I volunteer with several students who don't have the financial means to afford the many activities that you might see on many college applications. As a matter of fact, I was meeting with one of my students on Tuesday, and he said, "Look, I only have three activities. I started an engineering club at my school, and I'm a peer tutor, et cetera, et cetera." He mentioned the third one. And he said, "But really, I'm expected to be at home right after school, and I'm expected to be at home. Culturally, it is that was the standard, that it was being upheld in his house." And he said, "So I really don't have anything else." And I said, "Well, when you get home and after you finish your homework, what do you do?" He's like, "Well, last year I built a computer." Well, that's an activity. He went on YouTube and he taught himself how to build a computer. "I also drum. I taught myself how to drum." And I'm like, "Oh, you have a drum, like you have a, drum kit in your house?" No, it's just a drum pad and like, $10 sticks. That's all. Okay, so he taught himself how to drum. And then for sign language, I did videos in Spanish, but also signed it because I have a cousin who's deaf. Okay, those are all activities. And that is how this young man spent his last year and a half, most of it in COVID. But, and we were all kind of, limited in our activities and somewhat in lockdown. But it sounded to, the way he presented, he's like, "I've been in lockdown all my life. When I get home, I go to school, I come home, I do my homework, and then I'm in lockdown. Like I'm not to leave the house." But he's done great with those activities. And then one more point that I'd like to add, Mark, you mentioned at the very selective institutions, yes, they look at everything, but I feel like they also, and you would know this best, of course, but they look at also depth. It doesn't serve you to be a member of the Spanish club, a member of the ski team, a member of the ASB. What would matter most is if you or a member of the gardening club. I'll go back to the gardening club.
You like gardening on the side there, Sylvia?
I actually don't. I have a horrible green thumb. My father will tell you that. Oh my gosh, I kill everything that is green. But no. So the gardening club. I have one student who actually, really is very passionate about gardening. And so he took the gardening club and then he went to an underserved community and started a little vegetable garden in this little teeny plot of land. And then came up with like a little recipe cookbook of like, what can you do with these three vegetables that we're growing here? And he put that up on the website. And that shows depth rather than, oh yeah, and then I went to my Spanish club meeting and then I went to the ski club. And, that just shows real interest and that is authentic. That again goes back to my point of if you let your kids have the room to really develop in that one area, whether it be the sport or the music.
Lisa, anything you want to say?
Yes, I feel like this is such a tricky issue because on the one hand, I am the queen of overscheduling. On the other hand, I know how much stress that causes me and my family. And I see in my clients so much of sessions are about, and then I had to get so-and-so to this, and then I had to get so-and-so to that, and then I was running late, and we didn't have dinner, and it just goes on and on. So activities, for the American family, is a blessing and a curse. And I think that people feel like I was talking to a dad today and he was saying that his kid is really tired. And his kid is little. He's like in first grade, but his kid is really tired after he goes into school. And then he can't get him to go to Code Ninjas. And I was like, well, maybe you need to like fire Code Ninjas. And he's like, but I feel like the kids are supposed to be in activities. And that's just kind of like how like you're being a bad parent if you don't have your kid in 6 things. So I don't know. I feel like that there's that perception out there that parents have. And I don't necessarily think we all have to have our kids in 6 activities unless they just love being in those six activities. But, people think that if they don't do it, their kid is going to not get into college. They're not going to be successful. And I think that's just not true.
Lisa, I hear you. When Mark was talking about type A personalities, I raised my hand. I am very much type A. And honestly, I'm like the little Energizer bunny. I wake up and, from sun up to sundown, I am going. I am checking off my to-do list. I do. And that is something that I need to remind myself. If I want my kids to be a little bit more relaxed and have a slower pace and have really time to go out there, and I live in California, so go out there and ride their bike every day, go for a walk. When they were young, like literally take a stick and like just poke at the ground with the stick, in the dirt, play in the dirt, then I also have to model that. And that has been something that I need to work on a lot more. I need to model like the slower pace of life if I want my students to see that and appreciate it and understand it.
Right, well taken. We all modeling is that's how they learn, right? I do want to comment on one thing, and you both sort of alluded to it. One of the biggest misperceptions in college admissions is that you have to do certain activities. People will, I get this question all the time. Like, what if I'm not playing a sport? Or what if I don't do volunteerism? You know, and that is just not how colleges think. They really, really, really want your activities to be a reflection of what you love. They want to be able to see what you did and know who you are by what you did. And so if you're just doing things to be doing them is not going to really help you in the process. And really what really colleges really care is what do you care? Like sometimes you hear things from colleges that are pretty PC and they have to speak to the exception because you ask them a question like, you're in an info session and you say, I'm looking at your school profile and gee, most of your students are like a 3.9 and your median test scores are like, 32 ACT and 1420. Like, I don't have anything like that. So should I not even bother applying? Well, they're going to speak to the exception because you might be the best quarterback in the state. They don't know who they're talking to out there in that group. So they're going to say, well, we have that, we have 25% that are under this. That's just the middle. So you'll hear that. But one thing that college admissions officers say, and they really do mean it. When they say, we don't care what your activities are. We just care that you care. We care that you care. And it is always better to go deep and go substantive and go deep. We have a pretty cool in the news coming out that's going to talk about that in the next few weeks. So yeah, I think that I wouldn't be concerned if you're looking at it from a college admission standpoint. There are lots of schools out there that aren't even going to look at activities. And I loved me not just saying that a lot of times you can sit down and brainstorm and come up with activities, but Sylvia went through and gave us multiple examples with the same student of how a lot of times when you brainstorm, there are things that are there. And I think that you'll be fine. So, by the way, this was fun. The first time we've ever had 3 people on together. I'm still calling you the Midwest, so, Lisa, because you lived there for so long. We got the Midwest, and we got the East Coast, and we got the West Coast. And for those of you who missed, Sylvia was on episode 194. That was her first episode with us, and she's gonna give her an expanded role, both as a substitute if Dave or Lisa need a break, or just when we need to, as Lisa said, estrogen. We need a little bit more of a female perspective, more of a West Coast perspective. And we had enough listeners tell us that you're a little kind of male-centric over there, and don't forget us in the West Coast. And so if you're not familiar with Sylvia, I'm someone I've gotten to know over the last few years, and she's also someone who's got a senior going through the process. And so I think she gives us that dimension. And so first time we tried 3 on here, and I think we did okay.
Oh, yeah. I have one more point that I wanted
Sure.
to get off my chest. All right. So
Get it off.
this is going to be Lisa's rant, I guess. Why do people think that their kids have to do tons of activities or exceptional activities? I think that's partly on our field. I think it's partly on college consultants. I know in my first class in the program that I did to get my certificate in educational consulting, one of the IECs came on and she was giving an example. And she said, well, there was this kid I was working with, great student, and he wanted to go be a counselor at his summer camp because he has been working his whole life for that. And I told him, well, do you want to go to summer camp or do you want to go to Harvard? And she wanted him to go do like maybe a travel abroad where he studied and volunteered. And I thought, boy, if, I want that kid to go to summer camp because that's what he wants to do. And if this is what I'm going to be expected to do in this field, like I'm out of here. I cannot do that. And thankfully that's the exception. But my Facebook feed, like, I don't know why, but I keep getting advertised, get your kid into the Ivy League. They don't need grades. We can help them find their passion and activities. And so it's like there's this perception that through activities you can sculpt someone to get into the Ivy League. And people are paying money for that. And, I don't think that's just on parents. I think that's on the field.
And it really gives us a bad reputation with college admissions professionals. It adds to the angst, and it's just so not true. That is a bunch of malarkey. That is a bunch of malarkey. And so it's kind of sad to see that. But I think we need to own that as a profession and push back at it. And I think that was good. I'm glad you got the Lisa rant out.
I do feel better. Thank you. And it wasn't even about my own childhood this time. So there you go. I'm moving on.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies. I appreciate you chiming in, and we'll have to do this again.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Mark. Bye, Lisa.
Bye.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, as you can tell, Kevin Newton is a tremendous addition to our podcast. If you heard part one, we talked about his company in education abroad, and he made the case for why going overseas for 4 years is an opportunity that a lot more people need to explore. I've talked to Kevin through the week, and I said, "Hey, Kevin, I looked at our college spotlights. We've literally done 2 international. How would you like to do some?" He's like, "Absolutely." So you'll be hearing from Kevin a little bit more because he's committed to once a quarter coming on and profiling an international school for us. I'm very excited about that. But in today's episode, Kevin talks about University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and he explains how their admission process works. He explains how Americans are perceived in the UK and other international schools. He explains whether your extracurriculars matter in international schools, and he shares more reasons why students go to university in another country. Listen and enjoy.
Now let's look at a less selective university, but still a pretty tough one. Someplace like the University of Edinburgh, which is still a top 20 school worldwide, according to some counts. I don't care for rankings too much, but at the same time, it helps to place it in people's minds. You don't have to interview. You don't have to take any kind of assessment test within your subject. You've just got to have the AP scores. And even then, there's a surprising amount of flexibility. If you can't take AP scores because of the pandemic or because your school doesn't offer them, call them, email them, work with them. This is something that I work with a lot with my students is, again, something we see here in the US is demonstrated interest. American perspectives are really valued overseas. Oxford and Cambridge don't have to compete to get those American perspectives. St. Andrews, because it's so famous and was recently named the best school or the best university in the UK, doesn't have to compete. But the second you step outside that comfort zone of those 3, 4, maybe 5 universities that everyone has heard of, you're a bit of a hotter commodity. You bring a perspective to campus that is valued. And not everyone thinks like an American. And that's something they really want to have, especially as the UK especially, but also we've seen this a lot in the Netherlands in recent years. They want to become global universities and they want an American perspective and they're willing to provide some flexibility. Now, if you don't have a 2.75, you're not applying and getting into the London School of Economics. Or if you have a 2.75, you're not applying and getting into the London School of Economics. It's just not going to happen. But again, that perspective and the passion, and they just want to make sure that you're going to be able to keep up.
So then things like extracurriculars, like not looked at all, looked at a little bit. What role do extracurriculars play, if any, in the process?
Mark, this is a great question because there's a lot of confusion out there about it. Let me just say, I loved my time being on student council when I was in high school. It wouldn't matter. Mm-hmm. I wish I could claim being a high school athlete. Anyone who's watching the video version of this knows that that's not true. It doesn't matter. There are a few things that do matter, though. If you're in Science Olympiad and studying for a science degree, that matters. If you've started a business and you're looking to study business or economics, that matters. If you've done reading outside of what's been assigned and if you've done reading outside of what's been assigned and you've written blog posts on it or articles or anything, that matters. Even if you've just done the reading and thought about it, that matters. For Oxford's most popular course, Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, there's a reading list that first years are expected to do. If you start picking a few of those titles, and these are big, weighty philosophical and economic titles, if you start reading them and start just thinking about them and incorporate that into your personal statement, that's what stands out. Again, they want to see that you've spent your time outside of class to pursue what you're academically interested in. But as for worrying about a state title in tennis or boys state or something like that, it's very diminished. The one thing I would say is if you're applying to Oxford and Cambridge and your interviewer happens to share a love for your sport, that can help you very minutely, but it's never anything to bet on.
That's great stuff, Kevin. Let's go back to the whole conversation of why go overseas, as I feel like we can do a little deeper dive on that. We talked about cost, of course, is one factor. We've also really talked about the fact that some people don't like holistic admissions. They shine better in a non-holistic sense. What about the person that just wants more of an international experience than they'll get from study abroad? Do you encounter that? Because I know I do. So if I do, you must.
I think that that's probably the one reason I really like to hear the most is that people like to say the world's becoming a more connected place. Well, I'm a history guy who did the Middle Ages in the Middle East. The history of the world's been becoming a more connected place for the last 1,000 years. And that's a good thing because I happen to like spices in my food, for example. And I think that someone who's got that global fluency, and that's not necessarily fluency in a second language, although going abroad is a great way to get that. No one can really doubt that you speak Italian if you've got a undergraduate degree from La Sapienza in Rome. No one can really doubt that you speak German if you've got a degree from the Technical University of Munich. These places don't always have English language programs through a bachelor's degree level. It's an opportunity to show that you understand. And it's also, as it was for me to step back to my own personal experience here, it's an incredible opportunity to get to not only live abroad, but to work abroad. I mean, I poke a lot of fun about my time at the encyclopedia, but I got work experience in the UK, which it wasn't just an internship. It wasn't just me living there. It was me actually getting paid and having to, on one hand, understand how a different working culture works, but also a lot of those things that we associate with a first job of learning out how to do your taxes and make sure your insurance is taken care of and all that. I got an education in that in a foreign country. And just because everything's in English didn't necessarily mean that it was transparent. So the ability to kind of work through those problems and be someone who later employers knew could understand an international culture and what they were going through was pretty invaluable.
No, that's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, we have two recommended resources for episode 197. They're both books. They're both books by Dennis Stemmle. The first is called Time Management Secrets for College Students. And the subtitle of this book is The Underground Playbook for Managing School, Work, and Fun. And that book came out in 2019. Stemmle's a professor in the business department at Coastal Carolina University. He's also a founder of the College Success Academy. And this is a great book if you're looking for a gift for a high school graduation. It's 169 pages and it's a pretty quick read. And what Stemmle believes is that 30% of the kids who drop out after their first year at college primarily drop out because they do not know how to transition from the highly structured environment of high school to college, where you have so much free time and you have to be disciplined. One thing that's great about Time Management Secrets for College Students is the book contains these real-life stories of individuals who actually struggled with their procrastination. They learned how to get over it. The book deals with everything from brain plasticity and neurotransmitters and jetty mind tricks to relaxation techniques and the best wisdom on goal setting and time management techniques that have proven to work. And the second book Stemmle wrote just came out actually a year ago at the end of 2020. It's called Procrastination Solutions for College Students, subtitled The Underground Playbook for Overcoming Procrastination and Achieving Peak Performance. And this book looks at scientific and practical reasons why students procrastinate and what you can do to change. I don't know if you need both books, and usually I recommend you go with the author's most recent books. But when two books focus primarily on the same topic, but if procrastination and time management are really hurting your child, maybe it's worth the $40 to get both. We will now return to the final segment of my interview with Kevin Newton. Are you experiencing more students looking overseas, would you say? Because I'm seeing the numbers have gone up, and is that cost? Is it these other programs, or do you also find that like the political atmosphere in the country is something that can influence some people to maybe look for a place that may be more aligned with their perspective?
Mark, it's really all the above. There are people who feel that they've saved and saved for their child's education, and it may not completely cover their education if they were to stay here in the US. There are people who, they feel they can benefit from a non-holistic approach, as we discussed earlier. There are people who want to, I don't want to make too much of it, but certainly I think we all agree that the political atmosphere has become increasingly polarized in the past several years. And either the student or the parent want a way out. That's not always the best reason. You want to hear someone who's passionate about this, but again, practicality has to take over, and you understand that I've got a different experience than a lot of people, and I'm very happy to help them. All that is to say, to get back to your previous question, there's definitely been in the past few months an uptick in demand. And it seems to go beyond the pandemic trough. We noticed a lot fewer students not wanting to do this because there was a lot of fear about the pandemic. And something I like to point out is I cannot think of a country off the top of my head that stopped issuing student visas during that time. There may have been a 2 or 3 week period where they were on hold, but you could still, as a student, fly over, spend 2 weeks in quarantine, and go on with your studies. And just to be clear, sometimes these quarantines, just as anything, there were mixed reviews on them, but some of them got pretty comfortable. It was still, you were getting breakfast, lunch, and dinner and 2 snacks a day, someplace pleasant to stay. It wasn't that they had always forgotten about you. In fact, there were some complaints I saw on social media that a certain UK university felt they were treating the international students better than they were treating the domestic students. And, it's one of those things where I think people had the absolute right to be afraid. I know that I still hold nothing against anyone who kind of just said, I can't do this right now, just because I feel that it's not the right move. But I think now that things are starting to get a little bit better on the pandemic approach, especially globally. I just saw the news today where the US decided to start rolling back some of its restrictions on international travelers. It's the kind of thing where it's certainly picking up. And I, for one, am very happy to see it beyond the obvious, personal and financial interests I have in it. It's something I think is good for people to talk, for people to go to get out of their comfort zone, go overseas, make friends, build a life. Whether or not you stay there is up to you. It's something I'm very passionate about. We'll seal it with that.
Yeah, 2 other things I've noticed. One is there's just a certain, this might have been you, but there's just a certain type of adventuresome person that just wants to experience something completely new and different from what they've had here. And the other category that I encounter fairly frequently is someone who has some kind of family ties to another country. So maybe it's like, oh, my grandma's from Germany and I visited her quite a bit growing up in the summers and I just like that part of the world. Or I want to explore, maybe it's even a parent, or it could be a relative. Something within your family lineage connects you to, an Ireland or, whatever the country is. And so there's like that sort of can fuel that intellectual curiosity. Like I'd kind of like to explore the land that my grandmother grew up in, or you know what I mean? That was our lineage before we came over here. Do you encounter that?
Quite a bit, actually. And, it's interesting how it ends up being framed, because about 50% of the time it's, I want to explore where my family came from. The other 50% of the time, and this is a very pragmatic thing that I am completely on board with, is that I still have a citizenship to this country. I can, and again, it's no less romanticized. They want to explore where they've got family. They want to explore where they came from. And in a lot of cases, just as in-state tuition in the United States saves money, most universities, including Oxford and Cambridge, are publicly funded overseas. There are only a handful of private universities as a general rule. And, some of these can be really great places. There's one in Milan that is phenomenal and gets mentioned in the same sentences as, say, LSE or Wharton. There are others that just aren't, and that's okay.
LSE, by the way, London School of Economics.
Thank you.
Kevin went a little lingo on us there.
They pride themselves on being the best social sciences university in the world, and routinely, they don't get ranked as high globally because they only focus on the social sciences. But that's neither here nor there. But there are all these public universities overseas that have to pay or have to charge lower tuition. In the UK, if you're a UK citizen, it doesn't matter if you've not lived there in a while, you're going to pay around £9,250 per year for undergraduate tuition, which I don't know the exact exchange rate right now, but it's around $12,000 or $13,000. If you're in the EU, it does get a little hairier. A lot of people have Italian or German or Dutch or Spanish citizenship. But Ireland, for example, insists that you have had to live in the EU, whereas much of the rest of the EU says, as long as you've got the EU citizenship, we're happy to give you the EU tuition rate. So again, it's something to always be sure of. But if you happen to have a grandparent who came from overseas or something like that, it's certainly time to check on that, because that can be an invaluable thing to pass on to your child.
Kevin, this has been absolutely fantastic, and we've just scratched the surface. But friends, I'm making a public commitment to everyone here. Kevin's going to come back. He's going to come back every 6 months. He'll answer your international questions because he's just got an area and a breadth of expertise and experience I just don't have. And so it makes sense to partner with him, which is what I do with both School Match for You, my educational consulting company, and for this podcast. And so there's so many more things we can talk about. We can talk about the visa process. We can talk about, different countries, what the culture's like, and so many other things. So send your questions in to Questions at Your College Bound Kid. And Kevin, you have an honor that no one else has had. And I think your interview 77 or 78 is you are the first time we've ever had a first-time guest that I'm not putting you on the hot seat on the first interview. But I'm warning you right now, you're getting it the next time.
I can't wait.
So you're getting it. I'm giving him what I call a Dallas exemption. So what Kevin didn't say earlier is he lives in Dallas, Texas now, very recently. It's a new move, and Dallas holds a special place in my heart. I lived in Dallas for 7.5 years. So I'm giving him a Dallas exemption, but only because he's coming back, and we'll drill him on the hot seat in the lightning round 6 months from now. But send your questions in, and Kevin will answer them. So thanks so much for coming on today, Kevin.
Mark, it's been my pleasure, and I look forward to next time. Thank you again.
Well, you know, fast 6 months go, so we'll be seeing you soon.
Absolutely.
Next week in the news, the media is not a college applicant's best friend. An interesting article by Patrick O'Connor of the Counselor's Corner. We have 2 questions from a listener parts. In question 1, my son has lost interest in a college because he found the acceptance rate was too high. What can I do? That comes from Anne from my hometown of Chicago. In question number 2 is, if the school meets full financial need, how can they prevent having too many quote-unquote needy students accepted in a given class and still remain need-blind? That comes from Tazim from California. And our interview is with Matt McGann, the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Amherst College, on how to get an opportunity to research with a college professor. That will be part 1 of 2. And our college spotlight, drum roll please, Mark, please let me get this pronunciation right. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Man, we practiced you still jacked it up. Rensselaer Polytechnic. You know what? Now you know why they just go by RPI, right? Everybody just calls them RPI.
You know, I'm doing the promo and I'm getting nervous because I'm like, oh man, I forgot. I did Rensselaer, and then you get to the last one, it's like, how do you say that word again?
Well, you know what? The thing is, I can never spell that word right. Every single time I spell it, I mess up somewhere. But we've had multiple listeners actually ask us if we do a spotlight on Rensselaer Polytech. Fantastic school. Really excited about it. Hope to do it this week, but November 1 just killed me with all the deadlines. It's the busiest time of year for any college counselor is the last week of October. It's like an accountant heading into April 15th. So kind of got pushed to the curb, but next week, promise you, RPI will be here.
All right, RPI it is.
You understand why some people go by their initials.
Yeah, I'm coming up to the program. I'm going ahead and go, how do I pronounce that thing again?
You should. I wish we shared the outtakes to hear all Dave's practices before we record it. He was jacking it up.
That's right.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. And you can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Modfich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.